At this point in time, we're going to move to the keynote, and I would like to take just a few moments to briefly introduce the two of them. We have Geoff Zoeckler, who's the Director of Innovation at Kaleidoscope. Geoff was born with an unquenchable curiosity for understanding the things around him. Driven to use his curiosity to solve wicked problems, he combined a BS in chemical engineering from Madison, Wisconsin, with an MS in creativity from Buffalo, New York. For 7 years, he unleashed that unique combination at General Mills and Birds Eye Foods by leading teams and developing new consumer-centric food and packaging innovations. Inspired by changing the business-to-consumer relationship to a human-to-human one, Geoff has focused his last 5 years speaking about empathy-based innovation and consulting with Fortune 500 firms like Johnson & Johnson, McDonald's, The Hartford, Kellogg, Pfizer, and Procter & Gamble. He is most proud of a 6-month partnership with Design Impact to teach design thinking to 250 MBA students in Mumbai, India, and designing a year-long effort that led to the P&G Always Like a Girl campaign. If you have the chance to meet Geoff, which I believe you will in about 2 minutes, his wife or his 3 adorable daughters, you will notice yourself smiling. He says it is because of mirror neurons. We say it's because of his character, or with their character, I should say. And in addition to Geoff, we also have Kate Hanisian. Kate is the co-founder and executive director of Design Impact. She has over 10 years of professional experience in creative nonprofit and social enterprise development. Her work with Design Impact began in 2009 while living and working in a rural South Indian village. Since then, she has grown the organization from a small idea to a full-fledged public interest design firm that uses innovative approaches to address pressing community needs, which I hope sounds familiar. She has spoken and led trainings in various settings such as the Aspen Institute, TEDx, College for Creative Studies, and the National Endowment for the Arts. In addition to leading Design Impact, she teaches as an adjunct faculty member at the University of Cincinnati Honors College and the Center for Creative Leadership. Kate's work has been published through media outlets such as Fast Company, Innovations, and Good, and she was recently listed as one of Public Interest Design's top 100 global designers. Congratulations. Her experiences in corporate, nonprofit, and educational settings have given her a unique ability to build diverse, cross-sector partnerships that create positive social change. So with that, it is my distinct honor to welcome up front both Geoff and Kate. Thank you. Yeah.
Well, Kate and I both want to say thank you. This is an honor to be here in the room, to be surrounded by so much human potential, to be talking with future change agents around the world. And we are here to talk about some of our past experiences and things that have led to this idea of creating world impact. And we want to share with you some case studies and some philosophies that we have, but make sure you leave with 2 simple things to take back with you and to carry with you. Before we jump into that content, I just want to share a story from my personal life. So I have 3 daughters. My oldest daughter is 8. And when she was 7, she had a musical at her school. She was very nervous about it, had been preparing and practicing for months for this event. And it was very cute watching her get nervous, get excited. And so my wife and I are in the crowd that evening, and what we witnessed looked a little bit like this. Pretty normal looking, musical and singing performance put on by a bunch of 7-year-olds. Except you may have noticed in the lower, what is your right-hand side, one of the students was struggling. So he has a developmental disability, and his name is Sammy. And he had an assistant off the side, an adult waiting to take him off the stage when he could no longer handle being in the room anymore. And came to find out that, this is the type of thing he deals with a lot. This feeling of separation amongst his peers because he's different, he has a handicap, and is not able to participate in all of the same events. But his parents come, and they know and they recognize he may only be up there for a few minutes, but at least he was up there. And this evening, an unforeseen story played out that really sent ripples through the crowd and through my wife and I in particular. These feelings of sympathy for him, of feeling like, oh, that must suck, this must be awful for him to be separated, suddenly completely disappeared and went away when my daughter Lily reached out and held his hand. And with that one simple act, it completely changed his demeanor. So while he was stomping furiously and shaking his hands, as soon as she held his hand, everything calmed down and he stopped. And he stayed up for the duration of the musical, which was an hour long. And so his parents got to see him on stage perform throughout this entire musical, which was the first time they'd had that kind of opportunity. And she taught me something that evening, something really powerful. And that's this combination, this sense of empathy, of feeling another person's plight, feeling another person's struggle, and then reaching out and acting upon it. And these are two things that we believe can be very powerful for change. So we're going to share a few studies, a few case studies from the social realm and from the corporate sector and highlight this. But first I want to give you just a little context for who Kaleidoscope is, who Design Impact is. So Kaleidoscope is a purpose-driven innovation firm that's at the center of medical, technology, and consumer packaged goods. We use a variety of design thinking-like tools, and they often flow into three parts of understand, invent, and realize. Kate Hanisian helped to co-found and lead Design Impact, which is a nonprofit social innovation firm that uses creative and inclusive approaches to complex social challenges. And again, they use design thinking methodologies through three different types of approaches. Something called incubate, which means working directly with corporations that need their help. Equipping leaders, so some of the work I got to do in India with that team was about equipping leaders to go out and create more change, to use these tools within their community. And then also advance, creating new methodologies and teaching the community. And Kaleidoscope and Design Impact have a 5-year history of working together. And we have this common element of a belief that there is maybe a better way to innovation that can look like design thinking implements. And it contains 5 basic principles. This is from the Design School of Stanford. Empathize, define, ideate, prototype, and test. And when you really break it down, there are 2 main components that are unique about this philosophy. It's beginning with the consumer in mind, that empathize moment, that you would never start a challenge by just coming up with solutions, that you would first seek to understand what is it that we can learn from the people we're actually trying to solve. And the second part is this idea that we're relating to action, this rapid prototyping methodology, that you lean into failure really early in your process, that the moment you have an idea, you think of ways in which, how can I bring this to life? What are forms of prototyping where I can communicate this idea and get some feedback? And use that as a methodology to get further into the pipeline faster with less cost. And so these 2 points come together as empathy plus prototyping, we believe creates increased outcomes. Just a little bit more context before we get into some examples. I want to talk a little bit about what is empathy. We're going to be talking a lot about it, so I want to set some definition. People often refer to it as walking in someone else's shoes. And the dictionary does a really good job, too, of extending that a step further, of the ability to understand and share the feelings of another. So sympathy and empathy are often confused or talked about in one and the same. Sympathy, a way of thinking about that, is any time that you feel, oh, that sucks for another person. You see something and, oh, that sucks. Kind of what I was feeling for Sammy in the audience. Empathy is the moment when you switch into, this sucks. You actually take on the situation of another and you feel compelled to act on their behalf. So what my daughter exhibited on stage was a stretch into empathy. And another way of thinking about this that might be a little easier to remember is allowing what's coming into your head to impact your heart, which compels you to act on another's behalf. So that head, heart, gut, creating a very physical representation of what does it feel like to create an empathic connection with people. You feel something stirring in your gut and you feel like you need to act upon their behalf. All right, so prototyping, people often think of this as, oh, if you're going to make a physical product, you're going to make a new car, you need to create a prototype. Well, that physical modeling is one form of prototyping. But really the definition is a modeling of product or service that has just those key features that allows us to test key assumptions. It's not the full thing, it's not the finished product, it's an in-between stage that has just those things you're trying to test, just those key elements. And there's a lot of different types of prototyping. And hopefully this week you're going to get to experiment with a lot of these different forms. And as you go back into your country, you can try these different methodologies for ideas that you have. Some of them are physical models, but there are also forms of sketching, storyboarding, trying to put into on the page what you think a person might be going through from a scenario perspective. You can actually use your bodies, you can grab 5 friends and you can play act a scene. It's super awkward, but you always learn something from it. Kate and Ramsey, who lead Design Impact, do this often, and it's hilarious, but also it always creates a lot of learning. And there's a lot of virtual prototyping abilities nowadays with computing technology. And also sometimes you can't actually get into the live situation that you want to study for some reason or another. But you can think about, well, what is this like? And perhaps you can model an analogous situation, something that's like it but similar. So why would you prototype? It's about communicating complex ideas. It's about faster and cheaper learning. You're testing assumptions, and you're often exploring function, form, experience. And it's about failing fast, failing cheap, and learning. And it is something that you bring in very early on in the process, and it feels uncomfortable. But as you get good at it, you start to realize, okay, this is worth it. It's worth this level of vulnerability. It's worth showcasing these ideas before they're ready because of how much I'm learning. And that's something that I've personally had to get over the years. My background in chemical engineering would say, no, you got to get to this linear final solution before you're going to turn it in and ask somebody, what do you think? And that's really not a great method for creating real change. So with that, I'd like to turn it over to Kate to talk a bit about 2 experiences from the field.
Hi, nice to see you all. I'm really excited, as Geoff said, to be here with you. Just our table conversation at dinner was awesome, and I feel like we could switch roles, and I would love to learn from all of you in this room. So it's really a privilege to be here. And as Geoff mentioned, I'm the co-founder of Design Impact. So we are a nonprofit social innovation firm. My background is actually in education. So I was a teacher in the inner city of Cincinnati. And I kind of had this moment after 4 years of working there, realizing that no matter how great a lesson I prepared on Romeo and Juliet, if my kids hadn't eaten breakfast that morning, I was really going to struggle to have them have an inspirational educational experience. And so got really interested in systemic change. And at that time, my husband, who was a designer, was talking to me about what design process is and how it can drive innovation. And I was working in a nonprofit after that, and we kind of decided, why can't we use this process that business uses so well to create new products and services? Why can't we use that same process in the social sector to understand how to change behavior change around education or around health or around any of the myriad of social problems that we have? So that's why we started our organization. And what we're passionate about doing is driving innovation within the social sector, particularly within nonprofits and social service agencies, as well as philanthropy. But I'll start, as Geoff mentioned, we thought, we could talk about these big concepts like empathy and prototyping, but it's probably more helpful to talk about them from a case study perspective. So I'm going to share 2 stories from our work. And I'm going to start with this story, reducing malnutrition in Maharashtra, India. So the first 3.5 years of our work were spent solely living and working in India. For the first 2 years in Tamil Nadu, and then we expanded and ran a fellowship program embedding designers within nonprofits around India. And so we worked with an organization called the Deep Greenhouse Society in Pune. And what they were a community-based grassroots organization. They offered all sorts of classes, education, they had a daycare. And they were really interested in saying, how can we reduce malnutrition? So they were a very low resource. This was not like a large World Bank funded organization. This was a community organization in a very poor neighborhood trying to work on malnutrition. And so they knew that about 1/3 of the students in their program were malnourished, but they did not have any funds to put towards adding to their diet. So they said, why don't you guys work on this question? This is Jazz Kidit. So Jazz Kidit was one of our Design Impact Fellows. So she was from India, and she embedded herself within that organization for 2 years. So we actually had 2 fellows that worked there over the time on this project. And granted, both of those fellows were from India, but were really unfamiliar with living within a low-income community. They did not come from backgrounds that were historically low-income. So for them, it was a really huge learning experience to embed themselves within that community. And so for her, the first few months were just about relationship building and what Geoff was talking about with that, starting with empathy. So she didn't come in and say, here's what all the experts say about malnutrition, deep career society, this is what you should do. She said, hey, I don't know you, I don't know these kids, I don't know these parents, I need to take time and build relationship and learn from them. And so part of that is about community engagement. So we, as Geoff talked about, we use the design process, which starts with inspiration and empathy. And so all of our information came from parents, came from women, came from cooks, and came from children. So we just spent months gathering information from them, getting their ideas about how does malnutrition affect you, what does it feel like, what are your children going through, how do you cook, what foods do you choose, why do you choose those foods, how expensive are certain foods in certain markets, why, and then how does that change throughout the seasons, in order to understand where we might look at this issue of malnutrition. And what's great about design thinking is that it's not just empathy, right? So empathy is like a really key component, is understanding your user. But the second piece is also based on technical understanding of the issue. So our fellows studied, all the things they needed to know about best practices in reducing malnutrition based on WHO standards, and paired that through ideation. So we had this big ideation session after about 8 months of research, and came out with this idea, this prototype, called a ladu. So some of you may be familiar with this kind of dessert. I'm sure it's pretty familiar to you. So it's a ball-shaped sweet, right? It's really popular, and it can be made. You can make it from a lot of different kinds of ingredients. It's usually sweet, sometimes it's savory. And so the idea that came from that community is, well, why don't we take the ingredients that make kids gain weight, so a lot of protein ingredients, and why don't we stuff those into this Indian treat that kids love, right? They associate it with holidays and religious festivals and happy times, and it can be made out of ingredients that we can find at any local market. Why don't we try that? So that is what we did. And so I think Professor Friedman has we brought some ladus. These are not the ones that we made in India, but these are some from a local store in Cincinnati. So you can experience what I'm talking about as you are listening to what I'm talking about, and get a little extra dessert, because I know you guys had a long day. So these ones have a healthy dose of sugar in them. But so that's what we did, and we didn't know if it was a good idea. So we tested it, and it wasn't Jazz Kidit, the fellow that was doing all of the testing. She was working with the women in that community, and they were developing the prototypes. They were telling her what to buy. They were making up the recipes, so that they had ownership over that process. And I think this is kind of an important piece about empathy and about understanding your users, not just so you can understand opportunities for innovation, but so they can be empowered to own their own solutions. So too often, I think we find in the social sector that agencies are owning this process of solutions that could be owned by the community members themselves or by the end beneficiaries themselves. So by involving people in the solving of their own problem, this has now been sustainable for 3 years, this program, and I'll talk a little bit more. This is, finally, so testing with these were our expert users for these kids. So they gave us feedback about which ones they liked, which ones they didn't. There was, I think one day we found like a little bit of chewed up ladu, like stuck, like underneath the table, because it was nasty, it didn't taste good. So we really had to do a lot of work in figuring out what's the right recipe. Like, we need to please these users. If these kids don't like it, they're not going to eat it, right? We know kids that age. So that was a really big part of the work that we did. We paired that with measurements. We did blood tests or hemoglobin count, height and weight measurements. We partnered with a local hospital there to make sure the accuracy of those measurements. We gave the ladu to 300 children 3 times a week for 6 months, recorded all of that, and the results were super exciting. So over 50% of those children within that group that had been malnourished moved into the safe zone after accounting for normal height and weight growth for their age. So this was an incredibly exciting finding, and this program has been scaled throughout the Deep Korea, and other surrounding nonprofits have picked it up, and it's been sustainable for 3 years because we left, because it wasn't ours to own. And I think that's a really important piece there, that the community itself built this solution, and we were just a part of moving that process forward. So that is, oh, and this was also, I think what's kind of cool about this is it was picked up by Fast Company and the Washington Post featured, and I think mostly because it was a local, the thing that made the story exciting was that it was a local solution, right? It was something that already existed, that could be made anywhere. It wasn't technical, it wasn't technically savvy, it didn't need to be, and sometimes those are kind of the things you can uncover, which is pretty exciting. So that's the first case study, right, of some of the work that we've done using empathy and using prototyping to drive innovation within the social sector. How much time? And this is the second one. This was actually a work, and this is kind of started in a different way. So this was, we worked with, here we work in Cincinnati with the United Way of Greater Cincinnati. And we were working with an organization that was really interested in increasing preschool enrollment, so getting little kids into school earlier. And what's different about this scenario is that, like in the first scenario, the organization said, hey, we have this big problem, you should solve it. But here this organization said, well, we already know what the problem is. See this community with the red circle around them? Well, they were geographically kind of isolated from the rest of the other communities. And so the organization said, well, the reason that this community, with the circle around it, isn't sending their kids to preschool is because they don't have the right kind of transportation, because they're geographically isolated. They need transportation. And these are very smart people, mind you. These are wonderful people I've worked with. And we said, that sounds good, but you know what? Go talk to the people in that community just to be sure that that's the right thing. And they said, we've worked with this community for years. We know this is the problem. We were about to write, I think it was like a $350,000 grant to build solutions around transportation. We said, you're probably right, but go talk to them anyway. And what was really interesting is after a period of community engagement and empathy that they kind of did grudgingly, to be honest, they realized that they were asking the wrong question. That transportation had nothing to do with why children were not going to school in that neighborhood. What they learned after talking to parents is that parents in that neighborhood thought that preschool meant children needed to sit in desks. And they felt that their children were too young to sit in desks. And there was a very close-knit community that kind of their kids grew up together outside a lot. And they felt like they're too young to be in a school in a desk. So the organization realized they needed to totally change what they were solving for. And this goes back to Geoff's point about starting with empathy, starting as if you're not an expert. And I think this is really hard, right? Because we're trained, all of us going through school, getting our degrees, that by now you're an expert, right? So you should be able to come in and give somebody an answer. And I think the most exciting part about innovation is you get to become a kid again and say, I don't know. I'm going to pretend I know nothing and look at this in a new way. And I think that's when you really unlock some really powerful insights. So this organization totally shifted what they were doing, totally changed their intervention. And we did some really fun prototyping. They were trying to figure out, they couldn't get parents to come to these enrollment nights they were having. So they borrowed someone's minivan, and then they all got in the minivan and just bought like cheap bubbles, like the bubbles you can blow at Walgreens, and just played loud music and blew bubbles out of this van to see if they could get people to come see what was happening. And sure enough, kids started coming and parents, and they started enrolling people in preschool that way. They also said, okay, well, if we can't get kids to come down to our preschool, why don't we bring the preschool, which was called Head Start, up the hill to them. So they ran a program called Head Start to the Hill, where they ran an outdoor like mock simulation of what preschool is like to show that it's really fun and it's not in desks. And they got the whole community to come. What was really exciting is that they doubled their enrollment of that program within 3 months. And I think they wouldn't have done any of that if they'd written that $300,000 grant, from the start. So I think, again, what's exciting here is this idea of talking to the people that you're trying to affect and understanding what their real needs are. So I will stop there. Those are kind of the 2 case studies I was going to share with you from design impacts work, and I think Geoff's going to talk with you a little bit about a more corporate or for-profit example.
So So one of the opportunities I had in my former role when I was with the seed company was to work with a local brand here in Cincinnati. And generally start with that challenge of, all right, how do we increase sales for this brand? And the brand was working on feminine care products, which are the things that women need once a month during their period, or every so often. But they came at it from a little bit different point of view. Instead of saying, we're going to just innovate the next new product, we're going to get people to buy the new thing, or we're going to drop coupons. It was instead, they had this belief from the beginning that their brand could create a deeper impact in women's lives. And so they approached it from that question, and then engaged our team through an approach heavy in empathy. So we went around the world talking to women, and in each of those situations, we needed to train our teams in empathic methods. How can you conduct research using empathy? How can you create these connections, get all the way to this gut response with people you barely know? And that's the idea of changing a business-to-consumer relationship to a human-to-human one. Which is kind of silly when you think about it, but we construct all these fake walls around us when we're within corporations. We don't incentivize people to create empathic connections with their consumer. So we had to undo a lot of teaching within that setting and coach people on what is it like to meet another human being that you may not think is like you, but really genetically is 99.9% the same. And so as we went into these regions and we taught empathy and then had people engage in people's homes, one-on-one, 3-hour conversations that were non-scripted, we got loads of data that came back. So lots of observations and post-it notes and emotions, and it took a long time in each of these regions to define, all right, where's this overlap? We've had these 3-hour discussions with people, lots of data. Now how do we start to connect this into something that we can leverage, we can use, we can turn into an insight? And so we went through a define and ideation process in order to generate those insights. And at the end of each region, we came out with about 3 or 4 that were really relevant to that local area. And then looked at it at the very end of, all right, where are there similarities? Where are there places that we can create the biggest world impact if we go after? And those insights were given over to an ad agency and a creative video crew in order to create a prototype. Let's put a video together and see if this insight resonates with other women. And I'm going to play that video for you now.
Hi, Erin.
Hi.
Okay, so I'm going to just give you some actions to do. And just do the first thing that comes to mind. Show me what it looks like to run like a girl.
My hair.
Show me what it looks like to fight like a girl. Now throw like a girl.
Aww. My name is Dakota, and I'm 10 years old.
Show me what it looks like to run like a girl. Throw like a girl. Fight like a girl. What does it mean to you when I say run like a girl?
It means run fast as you can.
So do you think you just insulted your sister?
No. I mean, yeah, insulted girls, but not my sister.
Is like a girl a good thing?
Actually, I don't know if it's a bad thing or a good thing. It sounds like a bad thing. It sounds like you're trying to humiliate someone.
So when they're in that vulnerable time between 10 and 12, how do you think it affects them when somebody uses like a girl as an insult?
I think it definitely drops their self-confidence and really puts them down, because during that time they're already trying to figure themselves out, and when somebody says you hit like a girl, it's like, well, what does that mean? Because they think they're a strong person. It's kind of like telling them that they're weak and they're not as good as them.
And what advice do you have to young girls who are told they run like a girl, kick like a girl, hit like a girl, swing like a girl?
Keep doing it, because it's working. If somebody else says that running like a girl or kicking like a girl or shooting like a girl is something that you shouldn't be doing, that's their problem. Because if you're still scoring and you're still getting to the ball on time and you're still being first, you're doing it right. Doesn't matter what they say. I mean, yes, I kick like a girl, and I swim like a girl, and I walk like a girl, and I wake up in the morning like a girl because I am a girl. And that is not something that I should be ashamed of. So I'm going to do it anyway. That's what they should do.
If I asked you to run like a girl now, would you do it differently?
I would run like myself.
Would you like a chance to redo it?
Yeah.
Why can't run like a girl also mean win the race?
So very interesting prototype. And when I say prototype, they didn't go through the typical channels that they would to launch an advertising campaign. They didn't buy spots on the air to start off this campaign. They shot it, they put a rough cut together, and they put it on YouTube. And that was their start to see, does this resonate? Does this resonate? And if it does, they had planned to, well, then maybe we'll buy some ads, maybe we'll cut it, we'll trim it, we'll figure it out. And they were overwhelmed with the response. And taking a look at what those results might have looked like, you can look at traditional TV advertising metrics. It costs about 1 cent to 5 cents to put an ad in front of you. So if you're watching a television program and I interrupt it and I put an ad in front of you, that costs a company about a penny to 5 pennies every time they do that. And there's a lot of research saying, all right, well, what about YouTube? What happens when someone self-selects or clicks on a link from Facebook? What is that worth? Well, the value to the brand is estimated to be a minimum of about 10 times greater than when you're forced with an ad. So interrupted versus self-selection. And within 1 week, they had 7 million views. Within 3 months, they had over 50 million views. It's up over 56 million at this point. And so if you think about what was the brand value in this prototype, in this test, it's in the $5 to $25 million worth of brand advertising. So with that result, they were able to go back to their budget teams and say, listen, this is a big deal. This resonates. Let's leverage this. So they cut it to a 60-second clip. They put it in the Super Bowl. It played in the direct spot right after the halftime show, which is the most expensive spot to buy for ads. And all based on this idea of, we have this empathic connection. We believe this is something strong. And we're going to just test it. We're going to see what happens. And their next highest viewed video that they've produced on YouTube has, I think, 2,100 views. So this was something that they knew, all right, they put it on and it just went off. They could tell this resonated and they had struck a chord. And again, just want to come back to these points that empathy plus prototyping can equal really improved outcomes. I want to give you guys a couple of minutes before we close to jot down some thoughts from the stories that we've shared. You've got some great opportunities with Dr. Friedman this week to stretch your skills in creativity and problem solving, and be thinking about your own manifesto. What are you going to carry back with you? How are you going to create change with this degree and with this last bout of creative energy that you're going to get within this seminar over the next 3 days? So I want you guys to use your phone or pen and paper, whatever you have with you, to jot down thoughts of, what's one thing that stood out to you from this talk? What's one person or group that you may want to empathize with? Maybe you already have a challenge in mind of, when I get home, I'm going to attack this. Well, who might you need to learn from and create a personal connection with? And then thinking about that idea of rapid prototyping and opening yourself up and being vulnerable early in the process, what's one way you could act without fear of failing? So we're going to give you guys 5 minutes to write down that for yourselves personally, and then we'll close. The key point that we wanted to make today is that combination of empathy plus action can really be a foundation for creating a world impact. And through the case studies, hope that we demonstrated a few examples of where that was the case, where that upfront learning really paid out, and that step of vulnerability in trying something out before maybe it seemed even ready can really make a difference. And so, my final call to action for you is when you go back to look around you, to be open to seeing that need, to feel that stopping of others around you who need your help, and to reach out and to act, to hold hands. Thank you guys very much for the time and opportunity to speak tonight. Thank you.